Hello, everybody, and welcome to Biology Bite-Sized Biology. This is the second video now that I'm doing for plants, and this is focusing in on plant transport. So the main questions you could be asked for this, guys, is you could be asked to draw a label diagram of a leaf. Okay, standard enough. A little bit tricky, but I'll go through it with you. Describe the cohesion tension model. Now, they love this question. Okay, simply because there was Irish scientists involved in it, so this comes up quite often. Name and state the process of water, food, and minerals, the movement, how they get into the plant, and how they are transported within the plant. Name and state how transpiration is affected. So what affects the rate of transpiration, I suppose, to be more accurately put. And then name the two Irish scientists involved in the discovery of water transport. So that's going linking back up here to the cohesion tension model. Okay, let's get started. So 2020 is when it came up, and we would have answered some of this question already in plant structure. So if you haven't looked at that video, make sure you have a look at it later. So 2020 question 15C, I to part 3 have already been answered, and I'm not going to do it in this question. But IV, name the process through which water is absorbed through the soil. Okay, well, if it's water, it has to be osmosis, generally speaking. Now, you could say, theoretically, you could say diffusion in some cases and so forth, but like when it's water, like it's always going to be osmosis. V, name the tissue that transports water in roots. Okay, so that's xylem. And then you've got your two types that's your tracheids in your vessels, but you just needed to say xylem for this one. VI, give 2 ways in this way this tissue is adapted to transporting water. Common enough question. So I have actually 3 ways in this one here. Xylem is a narrow, continuous tube and strengthened by lignin. And that's going to be important because the taller the plant, the more pressure, the more tension involved in this water transport, so therefore it needs to be strengthened with lignin. So xylem is a narrow, continuous tube strengthened by lignin. That's actually 3 points. 2 Irish scientists, Dixon and Joly, first proposed a theory of water movement in plants. Using this theory, describes the mechanism. Now, this comes up quite often, and for this mechanism, you can put it in any order really, from 1 to 4. It doesn't really matter, but like really, this would be something you learn off. Okay, so usually what I do is I start from the bottom. So water enters the roots, osmosis, and this causes a build-up of pressure in the system down at the bottom. Now, in addition to that, water molecules cling to each other. Okay, that's called cohesion. They're cooperating with each other. They're together. Okay, and the forces that they allow them to cling to each other is by hydrogen bonding. The chemistry students should be familiar with that term. So water molecules cling to each other, cohesion. You do not need to mention hydrogen bonding if you don't want to. Biology students, there's only one place you will see hydrogen bonding, and that's going to be in the DNA and RNA chapter. Question 3, or part 3, I should say. Water molecules cling to the xylem walls. So they're adhesion then. They're adding on to the xylem walls. So not only are they clinging to each other, they're clinging to the walls of the xylem. So you might remember in your any experiments you've done involving a burette or a pipette, you're often dealing with the meniscus, or even a graduated cylinder. So the meniscus there, and the reason you have a meniscus is because water is clinging to the walls of the container. So that's adhesion. And then finally, transpiration on the leaves causes a pulling effect, and that causes a tension. So water is coming in through osmosis into the roots, causing pressure. Water is clinging to each other, because it naturally does. So by cohesion, hydrogen bonding, water molecules also cling to the walls of the xylem, and that's adhesion. And at the top end then, you've got a pulling effect due to transpiration, and that's causing a tension there. And that allows for the upward movement of water. It's something you just have to learn off. It's really, really important that you do know this, because when it does come up, it's not specified here, but like this could be worth 9 to 12 marks. 2018, question 14. Draw a large label diagram of a transverse section of a leaf. Now this could be quite complicated to draw, but like I simplify this as best as possible. Okay, start with the top. The top will always be the dermal layer. Okay, and for leaves case, they actually have one extra layer on top of it, and we call it the waxy cuticle. So the waxy cuticle is here. Underneath it, you just have some dermal cells. Now, the next part then is going to be the mesophyll section. So we have two types of mesophyll, and you actually kind of do need to know the differences between them. You've got the palisade mesophyll, and that's just rectangular blocks as I did over here. And you can see I have dots all along the edges. Those dots there are chloroplasts. And then we have the spongy mesophyll. And the spongy mesophyll is like spongy bone, okay, where the red bone marrow is at the heads of bones, contains lots of hollows, or also known as air sacs. So there's lots. All I did was add just circles, and I left some spaces for the air sacs. And then at the bottom, all you need to have there was a row of guard cells, leave a gap or two, and that's your stomata. It's worth practicing this question, really, this diagram. But it's not difficult, really. It looks more difficult than it actually is. That's just because of all the chloroplasts. But that was very easy to do. All you have to do is, whatever you do in the mesophyll section, make sure you put dots around it, and that's your chloroplast. Place an X on the diagram to show the part of the plant leaf where photosynthesis occurs most, and explain why it occurs most here. Well, it occurs most in the palisade mesophyll. So I put an X here, you can see. And the reason being is it contains the most chloroplasts. Now, there are other reasons. You could say that it's closest to the surface of the leaf and so forth, but I refer to it contains the majority of the chloroplasts in the palisade mesophyll section. Say two other ways in which the leaf is well adapted for photosynthesis. So this kind of comes up in the photosynthesis chapter more so than plant transport, but you can see how they're all connected. Leaves have a large surface area. They have air sacs that allows for diffusion of gases, because remember, photosynthesis requires a gas, and that's carbon dioxide. And you have loads of chloroplasts all around here. So I have actually three different adaptations for photosynthesis: large surface area, air sacs, and loads of chloroplasts. Now, IV. Name three substances which are involved in leaf metabolism which pass through the stomata. Well, if you talk about passing through the stomata, there's only three substances involved, and they're all gases. You've got your carbon dioxide, you've got your water vapor, and you've got your oxygen too. Okay, so that's the only things that are passing through those stomata are the gases. Carbon dioxide, oxygen gas, water vapor. And then the concentration of which gas influences the diameter of the stomata? Carbon dioxide. Similar to carbon dioxide in the blood, carbon dioxide affects the breathing, the rate of breathing, with the build-up of carbon dioxide in the blood. Okay, but sticking with here, the concentration of the gas that influences the diameter of the stomata is going to be carbon dioxide. And we're actually going to talk about that in a moment. 2017, tricky enough question and slightly controversial for one of the parts here. So you're given a graph here, which students probably wouldn't have seen too much before, if they did see it at all. The graph has the y-axis is the rate of transpiration. So I might just highlight that there. And then you've also got the time of day on the x-axis. So you're going from midnight to midnight, a full 24 hours. Within that, you have two graphs. You have water uptake and you've got transpiration. So water uptake is the roots, so water entering the roots, and transpiration then is evaporation of water from the leaves. Now, describe the relationship between the rate of transpiration and the rate of water uptake during the day. Suggest a reason for it. Well, you can see that as the rate of transpiration increases, so does the rate of water uptake increases. And as it decreases, the other one decreases. So I just said, as water uptake increases, so too does transpiration, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. Okay. Suggest a reason for that. Well, it kind of goes back to it does go back to the cohesion tension model. So a high transpiration rate allows for more water to be taken in. Remember, plants have to however much water they lose, they have to take in again, because they'll start to wilt otherwise. Okay, so high transpiration allows for more water to be taken in. Under what two conditions does the highest rate of transpiration occur that day? Now, this was the controversial one. So lots of students would have said there, sunny and hot, because that's what's there in the notes. It's also what's there in textbooks and so forth. Under what two conditions? But the question read, under what two conditions does the highest rate of transpiration occur? So therefore, you can't just say hot and sunny. You must now say the hottest, and you must say the sunniest. Okay, so you can see there was a slight change in the way it was phrased. Okay, and a lot of students got caught on that one. Okay, it was definitely one to realise the importance of reading the question. Okay, thankfully though, that doesn't happen too often. Name the cells that control the opening and closing of the stomata. Well, that's the guard cells. What is the advantage of plants having most of the stomata on the underside of the leaves? So the waxy cuticles on top, but the stomata is down the bottom. Okay, why is that? Well, it reduces water loss. If the stomata stuff were at the top, where it's exposed to the sun the most, then you're going to have a really, really high rate of transpiration, and the water uptake might not be able to manage. Give a disadvantage of plants of high rates of transpiration. So that's V, wilting. So high rates of transpiration isn't actually favourable the whole time, because wilting can occur. And that kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, if you have any plants, potted plants now, particularly at home, and it's a really sunny day, you can see that the soil starts to dry out, the plant starts to droop and wilt. Okay, you have to water it yourself. Okay, and that's because of the high rate of transpiration. What do plants do in response to the disadvantage? Well, they close the stomata. Now, they don't close it fully, they can't. Okay, but they can close it as best as possible to preserve their longevity in terms of their preventing wilting. And then name both Irish scientists who proposed the water movement. So that's Dixon and Joly. They didn't ask about the cohesion tension model this time, but they did refer to these two, Dixon and Joly. Okay, moving on, and you will start to see that they're going to get a little bit repetitive after this question. 2016 question 14. What do you understand by the term turgor in plant cells? So this refers back to the osmosis and diffusion chapter. But turgor is the outward pressure of cell contents against the cell wall. Now you can specifically mention the vacuole here if you want to. Okay, you don't have to. It's just cell contents is fine. That's grand. How do plant cells remain turgid for a considerable period of time? Well, however much water they lose by transpiration, they also take it in. So in this case here, I phrased it as by taking in as much water as they lose. What happens to plants if they lose cell turgidity? Wilting will happen. They start to wilt. And if an animal cell were subjected to the conditions that resulted in a plant cell becoming turgid, what would happen to the animal cell? And explain her answer. Well, it will burst. It has no cell wall. And I didn't explain my answer. So a burst, no cell wall present. Okay. Next. In relation to the passage of materials through cell membranes, distinguish between diffusion and osmosis by writing one sentence about each term. What that basically means there, everybody, is to define diffusion, define osmosis. Common enough question, whether it comes up in plant transport or comes up on specifically the osmosis and diffusion chapter. So diffusion, which is the first one here, is the movement of particles from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. And note the word just particles. Osmosis, then, is the movement of water, and you must refer to water, from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration across a semi-permeable membrane. You have to mention all of that. There's really no changing that definition. And in the study of human physiology, you encountered an example of active transport. Name the location and the material involved. So you might not have done this chapter. It's involved in the excretion chapter. So active transport occurs in the nephron, specifically the PCT, the proximal convoluted tubule, with glucose and amino acids. Again, you may not have done the excretion chapter just yet, and that's where this question comes from. Okay, we're almost there, and you'll see a lot of repetition now. Explain how root hairs enter, how water enters root hairs and then passes to the vascular tissue. So how does it enter? Okay, so you must refer to osmosis. That's critical there. So water enters root hairs by osmosis. And why? Well, the cytoplasm of root cells is very concentrated. Remember what we said about osmosis. Water is moving from a high water concentration to a low water concentration. So if the cytoplasm in root cells is concentrated, there must be a low water concentration there. In which of the vascular tissues will water now rise through the plant? So xylem. Give two features or adaptations of the tissue that will facilitate this upward movement of water. Xylem is narrow, it's a continuous tube, strengthened by lignin. There's three features there for you. Name and briefly explain any two processes involved in the upward movement of water. So, okay, I suppose in that case there's usually four processes there taking place. I put in all four again. So water enters the roots by osmosis, causes a pressure build-up. Water molecules cling to each other, so that's cohesion, hydrogen bonding. Water molecules cling to the xylem walls, that's adhesion, and then transpiration causes a pulling effect which incurs tension on water molecules. Okay, 2013. In relation to structures such as the cell membrane, explain the term selectively permeable. Okay, so only certain substances can pass through the membrane. Suggest an advantage of a cell having a selectively permeable membrane. Well, problematic substances cannot enter the cell. Name two substances that enter a human muscle cell by diffusion. Now, I know this is kind of bringing up diffusion osmosis more than plants, but I thought it was a good one to show you here. So, enter a human muscle cell here. Okay, so there's lots of things that enter. Like, we know we need food, so food is always in the form of glucose. Muscles need protein, but you can't say protein because protein is broken down by the body. We eat protein, but it's not actually protein that enters the body, or not enters the body, enters the cells, it's amino acids. And then respiration takes place as well, so oxygen has to enter. So I have three substances there, and the key there was to enter a human muscle cell. If it was to leave a human muscle cell, you could talk about water and you could talk about carbon dioxide. Explain the term turgor. It's just the pressure of the cell contents against the cell wall. That's it. And give a feature of plant cells that allow them to remain turgid for a long period of time. Cell walls. You could also say a vacuole for that. And why is turgor of value to plants? Well, we've said this one before, to prevent wilting and also support. But preventing of wilting is the key. Now, last question, guys. Name tissue in which plant stems, which water rises. Okay, so that's your xylem here. That's handy enough. Give one way in which the tissue is adapted for this. Well, I've said three ways here. Xylem is narrow, continuous tube, strengthened by lignin. Give a precise location of this in the stem, vascular bundles, or next to the phloem. State another function of the tissue referred to in part I. Okay, so xylem actually does two things. It transports water and it transports minerals. Now, it's important here, minerals enter the root by means of diffusion, not osmosis. The cohesion tension model of transport attempts to explain water movement in plants against a particular force, named as force. Well, it's against gravity. Gravity is acting on water to keep it down. Describe the principal features. Well, that's just going from 1 to 4 again, guys, which you've seen over here. And the next one then is going to ask you, name the two Irish scientists involved in it, and that was Dixon and Joly. And that was it. So you can see there was a fair bit of repetition there. Some questions don't come up too often, such as leaf and so forth, but still worth doing, because if it does come up, it could be worth anything between 6 to 9 marks. The cohesion tension model, that definitely needs to be known, for sure. and just the process of water, food, and minerals. Okay, so water moves by means of osmosis. You've got your food and minerals are diffusion. And then how transpiration is affected, and that's obviously got to do with carbon dioxide, and also how hot and how sunny conditions are. So everybody, look, I hope you took something from that for plant transport. If you haven't looked over the video on plant structure, I recommend that you do, because they do tie into each other a small bit. Okay everybody, best of luck with your studies.